Welcome, this is Jennifer, and I'm so glad you're here. So today I just thought I would share with you some really playful holiday cards. I saw these new dies from Spellbinders and I just had to use them right away. They're very easy to use and super playful. As you can see here, they create dancing die cuts. So I have a dancing deer, a dancing snowman, and a dancing Santa. I'm also going to share some tips with you along the way on assembling die cuts and more. Before we get started, I wanted to mention two things. I'm making some winter holiday cards today, but there are dancing dies for Halloween theme. I'm not using them, but I will link to them below if you want to check those out. Also, if you're looking to create swinging die cuts or swinging elements on your cards without these type of dies, I will link to a video up here on the top right that may provide some inspiration for you. Today I'm sticking with these dies because I felt the price point was great and they are so fun to make. Let's get started with our Dancing Santa card. For this I'm using the new Spellbinders Dancing Saint Nick die set. This has everything you need to create that dancing die cut. Now I like to start by deciding which dies I need to cut from which colors of cardstock. And I kind of put them into piles, and then I tape them onto the cardstock that I want to use. I use a trimmer to cut my pieces down to as small as I can to cover those die cuts. That way I maximize my cardstock and minimize the number of scraps. This particular piece I can cut from twice. I am using mostly Spellbinders Cardstock today. I really like their colors. It's heavyweight and high quality, and it was easy to find the colors I needed for holiday. After I die cut all of my dies from the colors of cardstock that I wanted, it's time to assemble them. I like to put my die cuts onto a sticky mat to hold it in place while I glue them together. And then I can use a sticky tool, this pickup stick, to pick up the little die cuts and lay it into the glue. I'm using Gina Design's liquid adhesive. It's the Connect liquid adhesive. And I put it in my Gina Design's fine tip bottle. That way I can easily put a little bit of adhesive wherever I want to put my die cuts. A little goes a long way and this will hold nicely. Another reason I like to use that pickup tool from Trinity Stamps, in addition to having the end that will pick up your die cuts, the other end is a piercing tool so you can scrape away adhesive if it oozes out, as you see me do here. So I also use the piercing end to kind of move my die cuts into the position I want before I let them dry. However, you can assemble die cuts with whatever tools and adhesive you find best. All right, now for the S on his belt, I'm using Simon Says Stamp Gold Matte Cardstock, and I'm putting double-sided adhesive on the back. Now I made a bigger piece than I needed, but I can save it for later. I then can die cut with the die, and this will make it so that the adhesive is already on the back of this tiny die cut, making it very easy to add to my project. So if you want to do this, you could do this with all of your die cuts for this project, and then you don't need to use liquid adhesive. Totally up to you. Now for the skin tones, I was having trouble finding the right colors of cardstock, so I decided to cut them from white cardstock and color them with my Copic Markers. This is also a great option if you want to save a bit of money. You can just use white cardstock for all of your die cutting, and then color it with any markers that you want to get the color that you want. White cardstock is generally less expensive than colored, so that is a good option also. And you can see how the sticky mat holds the die cuts in place as I add the color. Next, let's create Santa's beard. For this, I wanted it to have some texture, so I'm using Thermoweb white flock sheets. Now these are actually transfer sheets. You can do cool techniques with them, but I'm just die cutting as is so that I can have a fluffy Santa beard. You could also die cut felt if you have that. So now I have die cut that from white cardstock, and I'll just glue those into place also. So after I've glued the different pieces together, I'm going to glue the head onto the body, and then we can add the arms. Now, the packaging for your die set will show examples, so it's really easy to figure out which pieces go where. I'm just following the instructions. Now here I'm cutting pieces of black cardstock to glue behind the holes that are created for the eyes so that the black shows through, but you could also inlay little black dots or use black gems. Now there are a few different options of what you can put into the hands of the Santa. It comes with, each die set comes with a few different options, and you can interchange the different die sets. So the Snowman comes with different dies than the Santa, and so you can change those up, or you can use small die cuts that you may already have. It'd be fun to also put a sentiment in his hand so it looks like he's holding it up. Next we have the legs. Now the legs have this funny little shape to them with a hole at the top. That's so they can do that interactive dancing feature. I'm gluing 2 leg die cuts together so they're a bit stronger. We want them to be strong when going through the mail. And I also added the boots. Now on the back of my Santas, you'll notice it's a bunch of die cuts glued together, right? And I want it to be strong because again, it's going to go through the mail. So I just die cut circles that were slightly smaller than all the die cuts glued together, and I'm gluing those on the back. This will again just make it stronger. You can skip this if you want to. You can double up the die cuts you glued together instead if you want to. Totally up to you. But in this case, the die cut circles seem the easiest. Before we add the legs to our body, we need a background to put this all on. I thought I'd do foiling, but you could do stamping or pattern paper if you prefer. I have a new Spellbinders hot foil plate, and I will temporarily tape it to some smooth white cardstock and slide some foil underneath it. I'm using my Spellbinders Glimmer machine because it works with my Spellbinders Platinum machine. You could use whatever foil machine works with the die cut machine you have. You just need to check with the manufacturer. Once I have my foil between the plate and the cardstock, I will lay that down onto the hot foil machine, and then I will put the 2 plates on top and press the timer button. When the timer button is done, that means the plate is hot, and I can take all of those plates out and run them through my die cut machine, which will provide the pressure. If you want to see hot foiling in action a little bit slower so you can follow along, I'll link to a video up here on the top right. Once I've run that through, the heat and the pressure will create a beautiful foil transfer onto our white cardstock. And this will be a great background for our dancing Santa. I trimmed that background down to be 4 by 5 1/4, and I'm adding it onto a light gray note card that I created that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. Now it's time to add Santa and his legs to our card. To do so, all you need is a foam square or foam circle. You're not going to actually glue the legs to the body. You're putting your foam circle or square right in that opening, as you see me doing here. Then you'll put foam squares or circles around the back of Santa's head and his arms. But nothing is gluing those legs in place. We want those to move freely. So once I remove the release paper from these, I will pick this up holding the legs so that they're around that one foam circle and place it onto our background. By the way, I did test this with foam squares and those work fine too. All right, so now we'll pick this up and lay it right down onto our background, and he's done. Those legs will move freely and wiggle back and forth. When you take it out of the envelope, you'll see the movement right away, which makes it fun that the recipient will see it and know it's interactive. All right, now for a sentiment, I'm using the Spellbinders Dancing Holiday Sentiment Set. This has some playful sentiments to it, but you could use absolutely any holiday sentiment that you want to here. Off screen, I white heat embossed one of the sentiments on black cardstock and cut it into a strip. Here I'm gluing additional black cardstock strips behind it so it has some dimension and will stand up on our card. I'll glue that right below Santa's feet, making sure that I'm not blocking the movement. And that's it for the card. You could add some gemstones and other things, but I feel like with the foil in the background and the fun movement of the legs, nothing else is necessary. And remember, Santa's beard has that flocking to it, so it has that soft look. But again, you can also use felt there, or maybe white fabric, or any kind of white puffy paint even. Here is the other Santa card I made. I do feel like these would be fun to mass produce. If you are looking for tips on how to mass produce a bunch of small die cuts at once like these, I will link to a video here on the top right that is definitely worth checking out. Okay, now that we've finished our Santas, let's move on to the reindeer, which is super cute. And I think you could even change this up to make it work year-round. All right, so here is the Spellbinders Dancing Deer die set. Again, you can see that it's a pretty small die set, so the price point is great. I'm once again kind of collecting which dies need to be cut from the same colors of cardstock, putting them together, and then I'll do all of my die cutting. Here I used the white flocking paper for the deer's face, and then I'm gluing the brown cardstock die cut on top, so you'll see a bit of that softness. I am again going to speed through the gluing together of the die cuts because I'm just following along with the examples that they give. I also like that the arms are separate so you can position them to either point up or point down, however you want. Here I'm putting a piece of black cardstock behind the holes for the eyes and a piece of peach cardstock behind the holes for the cheeks. Once I have my body and my legs ready, it's time to create our background. I thought I'd do hot foiling again because I like that these hot foil plates can be used year-round, so I could use it for a holiday card and non-holiday. I did the foiling off screen just as I showed you before, but this background gives a different look that's really fun and playful. Here I'm putting the legs right behind the body of the deer, but only putting that foam circle right in the center of the opening on the legs. Then I'll also put some foam squares behind the other parts of the deer, but making sure it doesn't get in the way of those legs moving freely. I then can pick that all up, put it on our project, and the legs will wobble back and forth, making that fun dancing die cut feature. Now I have another sentiment strip here from the Dancin sentiment stamp set that I showed you earlier. This one says, "You are so dear to me," which you could use year round with this die, but maybe put flowers in his hand, skip the scarf, and skip the red nose. Well, here I thought I'd use a red gem for the nose just to make it shine a little bit. And there we have our dancing deer card. I really like this candy cane in his hand, and you could put that in Santa's hand too, and then put a present in his other hand. It's nice that you can mix and match the different dies. In looking closely, you can see I used that white flocking paper for the chest of the deer and the face of the deer, which really adds some fun to it. And you can also see the shine on the background. Next, we have our Dancing Snowman die set. This one is really fun because it comes with lots of things that you can change up on the snowman. There's earmuffs, there's a hat, there are different presents and trees that you can put in his hand. And again, you can mix these with the other die sets too. Let's start with his face. I die cut one and I kept the eyes and the cheek die cuts in place and put tape behind it. That just holds those in place so I can add color to them. Before I just put pieces of cardstock behind the die cut openings for the eyes and the cheeks, but for this one I thought this was easier. So onto those little die cuts, I'm putting some marker. So I'm using Copic Markers again, but you could use whatever you have. And I put peach on the cheeks, orange on the die cut nose, and black for the eyes. Then I will take that additional white snowman face and I'll glue that right on top so that the black, orange, and peach marker behind it will show through. Now you don't have to glue this other one on top, but I feel like the dimension really adds to the fun of it. So I continued to assemble the different die cuts that come from the die set. Here I'm trying to decide if I want to put on the snowman hat or the snowman earmuffs. And I decided to go with the earmuffs. I just thought it was a fun, different look, but I like that both options are available. Also notice that there are little holes at the end of the arms. If you get clever, you could make it so that these move also by adding a tiny little foam circle in the center. However, I find that usually the arms just kind of fall down and I want them to stay up. So that's why I just went ahead and glued them down, and I'll just make his legs dancing. I really like the small Christmas tree that this die set has that you can put in the hand. All right, now I have already created our foiled background. This time I did my foiling on a light pool colored cardstock. This is the Spellbinders Dazzling Diamonds hot foil plate, and I did the foiling as I showed you in the beginning of this video. I added that onto a white note card, and now I'm just adding some additional dimension to my snowman. I want him to be thick so that when this goes through the mail, it doesn't get squashed with the foam squares behind it. Now here I'm putting the foam squares right on the back of the snowman, one at the center of the legs that you can see there, the brown legs, and then a few in other places, being sure that they don't hinder the movement of that leg die cut piece. So once I have all my foam squares in place, I will pick up the snowman body with the legs, and I'll just place that right on the back center of our card. I look forward to making a bunch more cards like this and changing up what goes in the hands, maybe putting a small poinsettia in the hand from another die set or a sentiment. Lots of ways you can use these. And they're fun to decorate. You could add little gemstones if you want to. I added a fun sentiment from the Dancin sentiment stamp set right below it, white heat embossed on black cardstock. And by the way, there you can see the white flock paper that I used to create our snowman. I really like that extra softness. You can see it in real life, kind of hard to see in the video and photos. So I hope you enjoyed watching the creation of these cards. I just really thought they were fun and thought you might like them too. If you're interested in the products I use, they are linked below in my YouTube description. And if you're looking to create your own swing elements with products you may already have, I'll link to that video here at the end that you can check out. Thank you for spending this time with me. Have a great day. We'll see you soon.